I have to tell you that I come from Colorado. My family lives there, and I'm originally from Minnesota, and I grew up on a dairy farm and a beef operation. So beef has always been a part of my life, and agriculture has always been a huge part of what I do every day. And I have two little girls, and I will tell you that we're growing up as a beef-loving family. In fact, my 2-year-old, when I put her to bed at night, I always tell her, we love you so much and you'll always be safe here and you can always make mistakes. To which I ask her, what do you do when you make mistakes? And she says, we put them in the freezer. And so clearly, we have a little 2-year-old who knows all about beef preparation already. So I share that story because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, and we talked about the average age of the rancher, is really making sure that your legacy can move on to the next generation and that you have a consumer for today and for tomorrow. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit of what we're doing. I want to share a story with you about a company that's not beef related. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Kodak. They're a 131-year-old company that went bankrupt several years ago, about 3 years ago. And the reason for that is that they didn't innovate and they didn't make change with technology. What's interesting about this company is that back in 1975, they actually held the patent for the first digital camera. And through that, they had the opportunity to innovate. They had the opportunity to really think about how they could be a leader in digital technology. But instead, they took that technology and they put it back on the shelf. They didn't invest in technology. They didn't invest in talent. And what happened in the 80s, many of you remember that digital cameras became really big. How many owned a digital camera? Right? And that was how you took pictures suddenly. You didn't take pictures through your film camera. You really went to this new place because you can instantaneously see your image. Well, I tell this story because Kodak had that opportunity to take advantage of the momentum and to take advantage and to keep up with the speed of change and to give consumers something that they were looking for before they even knew that it existed. And because of that, they were at a loss. They were always behind that trend. And now we all take pictures on our phones, right? That's how we take a lot of our images. Well, Kodak is no longer part of the picture for consumers. It's a Kodak moment is no longer going to be a phrase that millennials know. What we are doing with this program is making sure that beef, it's what's for dinner doesn't become like a Kodak moment. And so that's really the rationale and the why behind what we're doing. Our program really exists to strengthen beef's worth. And this could never be more important than today's beef price situation, than the dilemma that you're facing about whether or not to rebuild your herd, what kind of risks you want to take. The level of volatility that you have to consider is phenomenal at this day and age. And what we're doing as a staff is making sure that we create a consumer environment that is as perfect as possible for that consumer to choose your product with as little risk as possible. What we're doing with our beef checkoff programming at a national level is a number of things, and I'm going to talk to you mostly about what we're doing with food service operators and retailers and consumers. But you should know that back at our base camp, all of this is centered first on science and research and making sure that we pay homage to that discovery process that we need to take on, whether it's in nutrition research or sustainability, understanding how we can make sure that we're putting in the right practices to bring a high quality, high premium product to the table. Another element that we also very much center on in the National Checkoff Program is issues management. Ron had mentioned that I started in issues management and have been with beef for about a little over 10 years. I was your media relations cop on December 23rd. And we took hundreds and hundreds of calls on Christmas Day and the days following about what's really happening on cattle ranches today, what's really taking place, and how can I really put trust in America's agriculture. Well, that issues management team is no different that day than it is today. But the unique element is that the conversations are now happening in social media as well as traditional media. Social media is typically about 24 hours before the news cycle hits for traditional media. So we can watch with our radar where the conversations are going and manage issues before they show up on the headlines, which is hugely beneficial for beef because we know that we are in that radar, we're in that bullseye for many groups. The driving force behind many of the marketing efforts and why we've really shifted our focus from print and radio to digital are two things: the digital explosion and millennials. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it so you can kind of get to know how it works and why. And that really was the rationale for our new communications model. I share here that tablet ownership among young families has increased fivefold in the last few years. In fact, for kids under 2 years ago, 50% of kids under 2 knew how to operate a smartphone. That's jumped to 75% this year. A 25% increase in 2 years for kids under 2. My 2-year-old, and I have 2 kids, she's my youngest, knew her ABCs knew how to go onto my iPhone and look up information before she knew her ABCs. And that just tells you a little bit about how we're parenting, but it also gives you a sense of how she's gathering her information. We actually use iPads as a way for her to learn how to read. My 5-year-old watches videos and looks at ebooks, and those will probably be the ways that she learns through her life. She doesn't have to worry about how to balance because she's doing it at a very young age. How many of you have a smartphone now? And how many of you had one 5 years ago? Right. That's the digital explosion. So when we talk about where we're going with digital and millennials, you're going there too. You're exhibiting millennial-like activity and you may not even realize it. That's what we're talking about for beef. It's not going to some consumer off here that we don't understand, we don't know. We're actually going there as a consumer community. But what does that mean for you? So every day on Google, millennials are going to ask questions about food. In fact, there are 5.5 million food-related daily searches. And you try to get your arms around that. That's consumers asking for information online. Are we there? Are we there answering those questions, or is someone else? So you're all familiar with what a Google search engine looks like. So say they're asking, is beef? And they want to know about beef specifically. What are the kinds of things that they hear? Who's answering those questions? Google is very smart. They're building a business model, an algorithm that allows them to think first for the consumer. And so as you type in, just like you do every day, they'll think for you. They'll answer your question. Those top words that come down when you ask a question are based upon the most popular searches that consumers are making. So those are the words that your product is associated with. This is a DIY moment here, so I encourage you to go home and try this. It's really interesting. Put in words around steak, on beef, on cooking and handling, on animal welfare, and see what consumers are asking for. It's a quick, easy poll. What this told us was on this particular day, because it changes every day, is beef jerky healthy? Is beef jerky bad for you? Is beef bad for you? Is beef jerky paleo? These are the things your consumers want to know. And who's answering those questions? What comes up next is why we've really decided to shift so many of our resources from print to digital so that we can be there when they're asking these questions. This is what is called search. And a lot of our efforts, a lot of our dollars, especially as the beef checkoff dollars are so tight and resources are incredibly critical, that we're here first. And so what we do is we buy the search words that the consumers are asking for. And it's very important to buy the keywords that they're talking about. So it's not a display ad all the time or a billboard or something that looks really public, but it allows us to be right in front of the consumer when they're asking for information. And Google search words kind of work a little bit like a cattle auction. So the top keywords are the most expensive keywords. So you can imagine food companies all want things like dinner time. It's what's for dinner. what kind of easy, quick meals. And so what we do is we try to be as creative as possible to pick the right places for beef to be in answering this question. So now I'm going to talk you through a little bit of millennials. So what's critical here is that you can't say one point about millennials and have it hit on everyone, right? But there's some trends with millennials that's important for us to understand. Number one, they are a significant generation because of their numbers. They represent 80 million consumers. Generally speaking, they were born between 1980 and 2000. For the beef community in particular, we're really centered on older millennials. Millennials that were born between who are between the ages of 20 and 34. Why does that matter? What happens at that age? Start to get married, you start to settle down, you have children, your disposable income becomes yours and not your parents anymore. You have the ability to pay off college loans, and you're setting traditions. And that's why they're a really critical audience for us. You're feeding your next generation of beef eaters through this. The millennial generation is very optimistic, and I'm lucky enough to have several team members who are millennials, and what I love about having a space like that is that they're incredibly excited about change, and they want to take on the world. And that means that they're optimistic about your product too. They're very interested in finding out how they incorporate it, but they have a lot of questions, and they're going to probably push you a little bit on what you're doing every day or how to incorporate you in their lives. They're also connected to their parents, and I want to point that out because I think many of you may be parents of millennials or grandparents of millennials, and they really believe in giving back and that interconnection that they have with not just their phone, but their families. And so they are influencers of their parents. So by reaching millennials, we don't just reach millennials, we reach their community, their friends and family, and their parents. They are an incredibly connected audience, and to really speak to the level of engagement that they have on social media blows my mind. They're posting on Facebook 10 to 20 times a day. They're texting 60 times a day on average. These are all moments where they're sharing information, sharing bits of content with each other. They love your product. They really believe that taste is the reason why they choose beef, just like every other consumer. But they have questions. Like many Americans, at 4:30 tonight, only half of our country will know what they're going to have for dinner. Imagine that. Half of our country has no idea if they're going to have beef, chicken, pasta, where they're going to eat, are they going to be at home or not? And when, of those 50% who don't know what they're going to have for dinner, about half of them will prefer to have chicken. Why? How do we get over that easy mealtime challenge that we face? This is a big dilemma for us. If we can resolve this, we're not just going to be something they grill or something that they have for a special night or special celebratory dinner, but what can we do to be their Tuesday night dinner? That's what we talk a lot about as a team. How do we motivate, not just on those special days, but on any day? Another dilemma that we have to face and we really need to think through is how much consumers are willing to pay for beef. This image was from a year ago, and what I find is fascinating is you've got all three proteins here. You've got chicken breast at $187 a pound. You have pork loin at $177 a pound. And then you have chuck patties for $4.29. What is going to convince that mom who's thinking about buying diapers and buying clothes because those kiddos are changing every single day, and shoes, to spend 3 times more for burger patties? That's the dilemma. That's that value equation, why it's so critical that we put really specific resources against that value equation. Well, fortunately, millennials, despite the fact that they may have the lowest amount of disposable income compared to other generations, are very flexible when it comes to what they believe is quality. So if you ask a millennial what kind of smartphone they have, more than likely they'll pull out an iPhone. iPhone is tremendously more money than other smartphones, but they believe and they will spend money on quality, on an experience. Guess what beef is? Beef, at the end of the day, is more than just great taste. It's an experience. It's a moment. It's a part of life. It's what everyone wants to attain. And so for millennials, as they grow, they'll want to incorporate beef in that same vein. What's interesting is that 47% of millennials at retail right now say that the price is just about right. That compares to 17% of Gen Xers and 27% of baby boomers. Isn't that fascinating? I think that says worlds for your future, because that says that they're willing to keep paying that amount at the level of money that they're making currently. And that disposable income is going to increase over time. They're just getting started in their careers. But here's one of the things that we have to get over. When it comes to family mealtime preparation, 74% of millennial parents say that they'd prefer to feed chicken to their children versus beef. So why? Is that the chicken nugget? Is it the fact that it's easy? Is it health? We wanted to understand more about that. So we did an additional survey to dig deeper on that, and these were the top reasons why consumers said they'd rather feed chicken to their kids. First and foremost, it was about health, and secondly, convenience. So 55% of millennials said it isn't healthy to give my children too much red meat, compared to 33% of boomers. 46% said I don't find beef to be convenient for my children, compared to 13% of boomers. So it's interesting because what we're seeing is they're already coming in with this predisposition of questions in their mind about, is it going to be easy enough and is it going to be healthy enough? And as a young family, I will tell you that our children make more food choices than I did as a child. We were told to sit at the table and you finished all of your food, and if you didn't, you were going to keep sitting there. Well, I went through many moments. I can remember the fights I had with my own father over mushrooms and onions and foods that just didn't really feel like the right kind of texture in a child's mouth. And today, we don't do that for our kids. Unfortunately, there's helicopter parents, and I myself are one of them, that if my daughter says she wants a pink plate, I'm going to find that pink plate and give it to her, because it's not worth the fight. Beef should not be a battle. We should be making them a hero each and every time so that it's an easy button for them. That's what our challenge is going to be, is making it right. Part of the reason why families today are looking for solutions and making sure that we have a good value equation is that they're questioning whether they're getting it. Half of the time that they cook burgers and steaks, they're coming out a little disappointed. Those burgers may not be as juicy as they'd like them to be. Those steaks aren't maybe as tender. Why is that? Well, what we've discovered is a lot of that is the lack of cooking and preparation knowledge. They didn't walk in with home ec. They didn't maybe have moms that were spending as much time with them, teaching them how to cook. So they're starting from scratch. These are brand new experiments. At that $4.29 price, how many times will you make an experiment that doesn't work until you say to yourself, gosh, I can't do this. This isn't me. I'm going to go a different direction. We've got to be their coach through those moments and help them understand how to cook and prepare beef in the right way. So we've got to be easier and healthier. This is what's called a word cloud. So consumers tell us all the different reasons and the things that they need us to be. And the larger the word, the larger the number of people have said those words. So I'm going to give you sort of an inside behind the scenes look at our advertising campaign. This is sort of like behind the Wizard of Oz. This is what's called a creative manifesto. So it's not something that you would see in public, but it's sort of what creates the anchor behind our creative. And our current campaign is all about helping consumers understand that beef is above all the other options and that it is indeed what's for dinner. So I'm just going to read it to you. What's your dinner made of? Ours is made of a lot of good stuff and even some great stuff. Ours is made of iron and protein and 4 B's and 1 Z and a whole host of other essentials. They make this 3 ounces the most powerful protein at any table. Now, maybe you thought we were all sizzle, and that all we cared about was tantalization, but we're made from more than that. We're made to build up, break down, metabolize, synthesize, and then, of course, tantalize. So a lot of things can be tasty. We know we are. But what really matters is what you're made of. Above all else, beef, it's what's for dinner. So, and what I love about this manifesto is I think it represents the rancher. I think it represents you and who you are and what you're made of, and that really, that's what we're all about, whether we're talking about the product or we're talking about who you are. And here's an example of how it plays out in creative. This is a billboard, or it could be a display ad, just simple messaging reminding the consumer that we have something that tastes great and has something really amazing inside. So it isn't health, 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 and it isn't, so education-driven that we lose them. It's appealing to that sense of, you know what, at first I just want something great tasting, and then I hope it fills me up in a good way. I hope it's going to be good for me. It answers both of those questions. So this year's challenge for us was thinking big for beef. My team and I have spent a lot of time rethinking our programs and really trying to establish a new way of thinking. We started with a question of why. Why are we doing these things versus what should we do this year? And really probing on shifting that engine. And I want to thank you for letting us take those risks and think about how to reshape this, because it doesn't make sense to do the same thing every year. And that's why so much of this is happening. So we went through what's called a start, stop, continue. And it might be something for you to think about doing in your business as well, or maybe you're already doing it. What are we doing right now? What should we be starting to do? And what should we stop? Because in reality, when we start to think about it with that framework, it gets really clear. It gets clear what we've been doing that maybe doesn't have as much measurement, or how we evaluate in a new way and ask why. And through that, we built a new program. We really thought about integration in a new way with research and issues management. And we started with good content. We started to think about how we create relevant content that's shareable for our consumer target, how to build advocates for beef, who are the influencers that really matter to the older millennial parent, and how we best generate visibility, and locking these things together versus we do PR here and advertising there, and what does that mean? So really tying them all together. So I'll give you a couple examples of that. And creating content, that's where all of the materials like helping a retailer and food service operator understand how to save on beef, what to do in this current price climate, how to make good buying decisions and make sure that beef stays on the menu. One of the really exciting things about watching the last few years is that beef has helped food service operators stay in business. We have made sure that that consumer comes back every time because of beef to that operation. We help them stick through the recession. That's a great story that you can tell. And what we do in this area is help remind that food service operator why beef is a critical part of their menu. And in the midst of short supplies, what do they do with the steaks on their menu? Do they shift out certain names so they have flexibility when they don't have the product maybe they were expecting to buy? From a retail standpoint, how do we encourage consumers to choose that product? All of our websites, beef retail, beef food service, beef it's what's for dinner, are really critical content mechanisms. And that content can be tapped by partners. We also build advocates, and advocacy is a huge part of our story. We need messengers. We cannot do this alone. And let me tell you, there are so many parenting bloggers and fitness professionals out there that want and are interested in your story, that are looking for your resources. And really, what we do as a National Beef Checkoff program is create connections. We bring them to your ranches. We help them understand what cuts to choose in a meat case. We put it into context of looking at new cuts. On average, a consumer could name 2 or 3 beef cuts right now. And when they look at the meat case and they don't recognize a cut, they don't try within the beef category, they decide to walk down the aisle. And so what we want to do is elevate and remind consumers about the versatility, because we have a lot of cuts to offer. And so a big part of our program is really building upon the idea of experiencing is believing. So you'll hear about farm tours, and I hope that you'll be involved in those, or you'll hear about culinary immersion experiences, and that's because we're putting the product in the advocates' hands so that they can really get to know beef better. And finally, generate visibility. And really, this is your advertising campaign. This is the campaign that has tremendous notoriety, and shifting that from a print and a radio platform to being in the hands of the consumer, whether it's on their iPad, on their tablet, on their phone, or on their computer. We know that our tagline, Beef It's What's for Dinner, has tremendous consumer buy-in and awareness. 86% of consumers say they know beef it's what's for dinner. Many brands would love that kind of statistic, would die for that kind of notoriety. And so what do we do with that? How do we help millennials connect with that and make sure that it's part of their lives and part of their culture as well? Well, I'm going to show you a little online video, but for the last 2 years, what we've done is taken some of what you might be aware of from our past, our TV ads, and putting them in the hands of consumers as an online video that they would watch on their computer, on their tablet. So if a consumer goes to YouTube, for instance, or Hulu, and they're watching a show, or abc.com, and right before they're watching Modern Family or The Bachelorette, that consumer gets a short video. And they have to watch that short ad in order for us to really understand the measurement for it. So in other words, if that consumer doesn't watch that whole ad, you don't pay for it. It's very efficient. So if they only watch half of it, you only pay, you don't pay for it. And so I'm going to just show you, because it's really sharing kind of the life of beef and how it fits into a family.
Look back on all the important dinners. They weren't all fancy shindigs. Most were evenings with folks you love, who happen to be folks who love beef. Makes you wonder, what dinner isn't important? Nutritious, delicious. Above all else, beef. It's what's for dinner.
We just love broadcast because it shows your product off so well. And it is that TV ad moment. So we are doing that, but putting it in the hands of consumers when they're on their tablets. And let me tell you, have any of you noticed how your family rooms have changed a little bit? Your TV watching has changed a bit. You might be doing this. Maybe your spouse is doing it, your child. What's in your hands? Your phone? Or your partner's phone. They're on their laptop while they're watching TV. That's what we call second screen generation. So oftentimes, we can reach a consumer more so in that moment when they're on their laptop than we can on TV. So I want to talk to you a little bit about targeting. It's an example of how digital works really efficiently for you. When you have a billboard or a radio ad, for instance, you're reaching an overall demographic, but you have no way of knowing how many people really paid attention and reacted and acted upon your ads. Whereas with digital, we're able to be really specific about who we target. We can think about that millennial mom in Oklahoma City and the fact that she's posted on Facebook several times that she's trying to lose weight, or she's running, or she's looking for healthy recipes, and we can reach out to her directly through advertising. Because every time a consumer shares information, volunteers information about themselves on Google or on Facebook, it's all captured in what's called a big data database. So marketers all have information about you and myself. We don't have to worry so much about government following our actions as much as we do marketers, right? This is where it's going. We're volunteering it every single day. So we can target based on geography. We can target based on where the consumers are going for looking for information. For instance, we can share information with consumers on All Recipes or Food Network. We can reach that particular family in a certain area of the country that maybe you aren't. Maybe you think that you need to make sure that you reach older millennials in San Francisco or in LA or in Oklahoma City. You can reach them through digital. And we have a very strong state-national partnership where we're doing these things right now and gaining really good learnings through it. We can target based on a consumer specifically looking for chicken. And we can go in and do competitive targeting. We can target based on what kind of medium they're using. If they're on their iPhone, or we specifically want to reach consumers who are at the grocery store. Say they're at that meat case and we want to send them a message. We have that. That's where technology is going. At one point, we'll be sitting here in a few years, and there are some stores, including Macy's in New York City, that are trying this, that a consumer can walk in, pick up a shirt, decide whether or not they like it, scan the shirt, and walk out of the store with it. They won't ever have to go to a register. They don't have to talk to a single soul. That's where a lot of store formats are going to work. When you walk into the Apple store, you get an automatic message on your iPhone asking, what would you like? How can I help you? On a text that comes to you. That's what's called Geo Targeting and geofencing. And we'll have that flexibility so we could send a message to that consumer in the meat case about what they should include with that steak and why it's important for their Tuesday night meal. And finally, in closing, I just want to share with you a little bit of the analytics that goes behind all of these practices. What we really believe, first and foremost, is we need to listen to the consumer and what their needs are and really connect with them in the places that they live and the challenges that they face, that 4 o'clock dilemma. And a lot of what we've talked about lately as a team is the fact that there's not a lot of happy everyday victories for that young family. And so how can we be part of that? Those simple moments like sitting down at the dinner table and pressing pause is something that beef really owns, and no other food really delivers on that. And so social media analytics allow us to hear how consumers are talking about their lives and about their relationship with food and how they believe beef can or can't contribute to it. We listen to those analytics to participate in that dialogue and to really be part of the conversation. And this is a slide that just kind of shows you all the metrics that we evaluate. We look very hard at metrics and measurement to make sure that we're headed the right direction. And when we're not, making shifts in it. This is just one example of one program with traditional and social media along with influencers and how they're all flowing and how we can interconnect and glue them together in the best way possible for you. So that just gives you a sense of the why, the rationale behind why we're headed toward a millennial target, what we're doing with digital, why that's critical to your next generation of farmers and ranchers and to that next generation of consumers. I want to just let you know how much we appreciate the chance to be with you today and thank Noble Foundation for the opportunity to share with you where we're headed. It's a very exciting venture, and we appreciate your support in this process. Thank you.